Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. They have some new changes to StreamYard, and I didn't notice it to just now. So, my name is Gary Fowler, and I'm the host of GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech. It's great to be here one more time. I've been involved in startups for many, many years, 17 startups, over 30 years worth of experience. Been involved in two unicorns. I was on the original management team of Click Software, which was sold to Salesforce for 1.35 billion. Also, Eva.ai. We believe at GST that intellectual capacity is evenly spread around the world, but opportunities are not. People ask me what GST stands for. It stands for Get Stuff Done. It isn't about the talk, it's about the action. And with that, I have an incredible guest today. Nick McEvily is originally from Chicago. He is a fractional product leader. He's got a storied, interesting background for everything from Cornell University, where he got his bachelor's degree and master's degree, to working in an institute. No, it sounds like it's a German institute as research analyst and academic liaison. So with that, I'd like to bring Nick on board. Hey, Nick, I got a question for you. So what is this thing? Where was this? Was it in Germany? This for Gubad und Solar? Yeah, Germany, yeah.
Yeah. That's, you guys went back there in my LinkedIn to find that. Yeah, it's a good time. I was doing some research for German academic and private partnership on energy conservation techniques for buildings in Germany and across the
And how
EU.
was that after being it? So where are you originally from? Are you from the U.S. or from abroad?
I'm from New York originally, and yeah, just like spending time abroad.
Well, okay, I got that. How was living in Germany?
It was great. It was tough at certain points, but it was a really great time. I had some family there, and was able to go to Berlin, enjoy myself a little bit. So yeah, it's a great time. I now live in Mexico City and also love it here. You said you lived abroad as well, right? In Russia?
Yeah, no, I lived in Russia. I lived in the UK, lived in Germany myself. So I spent a lot of time outside of the US. So it was, and sometimes we forget as Americans that how important it is to look at the rest of the world. I mean, last week I was in Thailand, in Dubai, the week before that, Paris, and in France. And to look at the world from a different set of eyes is really important because sometimes we don't understand how everybody else perceives us.
Absolutely, and in a lot of the world, it's not positive. So it's important to hear those stories and perspectives.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was in Bangkok and I was sitting in the dining room and at the hotel, and I look and there's my street because a tornado had come down in Wellington, in Florida, and I'm looking. I thought, what's the chance of this? Right? I'm sitting in Bangkok watching, I think CNN, and I see the my street and a tornado coming down the street. I couldn't believe it. Actually, the world is truly a small place. Sometimes we forget about it. But anyhow, so how do you go from Cornell, and design and environmental analysis to end up getting into working for Mobile X and Mantra? How do you move through that environment? What would you just flip a switch one day and say, I'm sick of this. I'm going to move into more marketing kind of roles, and it's more interesting for me. What happened?
The common thread was design, actually. So I studied human-centered design at Cornell from 3 different perspectives: the product and ergonomics, the interior, and the building. And I kind of got curious about tech startups and company building and learned UX design. And so that was like the full spectrum from physical to digital that I was able to learn. And I started to apply that perspective and lens to company building. And that took me to Chicago and to build a company called Mode with Dan Novias and Kieran Panesar. And we scaled that company and was lucky enough to use my design mind throughout.
So when you went, first of all, why would you ever move to Chicago? I don't know about you, but it was, I thought it was cold in Russia, but I'm in Chicago. I was there when they had the lake effect, freaking snow, wind.
It can get rough.
Cold.
It can get rough.
Wow.
Part of the reason why I moved to Mexico City.
No, I got it. So, you went down through it. And so what are the lessons learned, as the beginning working in these startups? What are some of the lessons that you've learned, why these startups succeed and why they fail?
I think a lot of it is about the team composition early on and people that can wear many hats fairly well. Um, and the people that are willing and ready to learn not only these new skills to wear those hats better, but also about the market and about their customer. And that's what led to the rest of my career, really, which is focused on customer discovery and the pivot and product market fit, this motion that every startup founder needs to go through multiple times. And when I realized that, I was like, I just want to get good at this. I want to get good at choosing what idea to invest in. And that's kind of what you guys do as well at GSD, I feel like.
Well, I mean, you look at it because there's a lot of, there's a lot of challenges out there. We say there's you need networking contacts, operational expertise, and access to capital. If you have those three and a resilient team, you can pivot any company to success. And most
That's true.
people, and I've been doing this for almost 40 years, right? You get to the point where you understand there's some cookie cutter piece to it. And there's also some characteristics that the founders have to have in order to be successful. And if they're not
Yes.
resilient or they're stubborn, and not willing to look at different things, their probability of success is not high, right? If they
Agreed.
want to. I remember one time, this is a real story. The guy developed a lithium fluoride battery, which was lasts 6 times longer than lithium. And this lithium fluoride battery, compared to lithiums, the challenge is it didn't like cold, right? It didn't like cold, so we turned it into a super battery. But it loved hot. It wasn't, it was resilient with heat, so it would be perfect being in Mexico City or Arizona. But I never forget it. So I met with the professor that designed the technology and trademarked it and patented it. And what he said, well, how big is the battery market? Whatever it is, let's say 40 billion. He says, well, I think I'll have 95% of that market. So 95% of that market is, and 30, 36 billion. So that's what my company ought to be worth. And he came out with this, he wanted to raise $10 million. And we went to, and I said, excuse me, nobody's going to buy off on this. You understand, you've never built a company before. He said, well, this is what I think the company's worth. And I need $10 million. So that'll give him this fraction of this multi-billion-dollar company. That'll be the stock. And I mean, the VC laughed.
Yeah.
He thought the technology was so incredible, but he started laughing. He couldn't, take him seriously. And I could not convince the professor that what he said was totally out of the ballpark. It was not, this isn't the way it's going to work, because you're making assumptions that may or may not be true.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got to pivot in more than one way.
Yeah, exactly. It was amazing. So you went down through it. So, when you went through Mouth, how was that? You were working with Craig Kanarick, right, on Mouth. What made you decide to do that?
Actually, yeah, Craig, Sam, and Nancy at mouth.com rescued me from a startup idea. And I joined them because I needed to learn. And so they were really great mentors for me for a year or two while I was living in Brooklyn. And I realized that there wasn't as much room for growth for me there. So I decided to move to Chicago. And I was dropped into the center of the startup scene there. Brad and Eric Keywell, the founders of Groupon, started a VC called Lightbank, and I was the VP of product for their agency of record and helped a lot of their portfolio companies. And that's where I cut my teeth in human-computer interaction and real UX research. I learned from my colleague, Colleen Coranda, who got her master's from Carnegie Mellon, and she taught me the most important places to be rigorous with your research. And I was able to translate that for the rest of my career. For every company I've built since then, I've incorporated the lessons I learned while I was there at Lightbank.
And you've gone down through, life is truly a learning experience, right? It's, one of my friends, John Cow, came up with this thing. It's like an inverted pyramid, right? And technologies and the skills that you learn in one area can be applied into another area. And sometimes
Absolutely.
you forget about that, right? Like project management. I remember my first startup was I did a construction company that was using interesting methods and passive solar, and those before anybody else was talking about it.
Nice.
And super insulation. What happened is those same skills of building a house can apply to building a company because the same kind of, the same rigor that you need. You can't be screwing around in a house and put the drywall on and forget to put in the right kind of sockets or the right wiring in the wall. You got to have all those pieces in place. And we forget, and the startup's the same way. You don't put the foundation down right in the startup, the rest of the startup's going to have a lot of problems.
Absolutely. And I think I'm a really great example of that, how the knowledge I learned from products and interiors and buildings was translated into digital work. And then within digital design and research, I moved between B2B, B2C, SaaS, different stages, because I think customer discovery and understanding what your customer needs is continuously the most important motion for any company.
Yeah, that's I want to focus, Nick. That point, you're right on target. So, Bob Dorff and Steve Blank who wrote the book, right, the Startup Owner's Manual. And Bob has been was my mentor. Unfortunately, passed away, but he was my mentor and really helped me out a lot. I've known him for like 30 years, and we forget what I tell a lot of the startups is that if you don't do your customer discovery, you're going to fail because you don't know
and doing it right, because it can mislead you as well.
I think exactly agree.
If you don't do it properly, it brings you down the wrong path. So that's why I got maniacally focused on doing this discovery process properly. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about what I mean by properly and what some of the big common mistakes are.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that because that's interesting. So what proper?
I think one of the biggest mistakes I'll see is from founders that have a sales expertise. So they'll go out and do customer discovery and maintain their sales posture in the interview, in the call. And so let's say they get asked a question from someone like, oh, does this button do that? They'll say, yes, it does that. And it makes it so much easier for you to reorder that product or whatever it is. And they're selling the product to the customer instead of remaining curious. So in the same situation, what I would recommend is when the person says, what does this button do? You say, what do you think it does? Or what do you expect that button to do? And then they'll answer. And then you ask another question about why that was their answer. And you just remain really, really curious instead of in this sales, disposition. And what that does is it changes the whole dynamic of the conversation. It's great. The customer or the person you're interviewing is no longer like on the defensive, like most people are when they're getting sold stuff. They're really open and they're sharing a lot. They're open with their feedback and what's on their mind, sharing their thoughts, anxieties, habits, daily routines, and stuff that fuel real product strategy and sales strategy and marketing copy. So that's one of the bigger mistakes, I think, is staying curious during the interview process. But more than that, there's minutia within that data gathering process that's super important. So do you have a script for your interview? If you don't, you should. And is that script the same during every interview? Because you need to be able to create a pattern of all those responses across your cohort. And if you're asking different questions, you can't identify that pattern. And the whole point of this is to find common denominators, patterns, and responses that will direct your resources in a really efficient way. So those are two things, like easy, low-hanging fruit. I've got tons more that I can share, but I think those are the things that I found most.
Focus on that one part you said. In psychology, I used to be a clinical psychologist, right? It's called empathetic listening. And one of the things you want to do is you ask open-ended questions because you want the feedback. And the problem is if you guide them, they're going to tell you what you want to hear a lot of times too.
That's right.
So,
That's right. And they're going to feel pressured. Yeah.
And it's, what I did. So when we did Eva, which is my company that we sold, it was one of the first generative AI companies before anybody was really talking about, and this is 3 years before OpenAI. It was a pre-transformer model company. But I remember that we went out and my partner and I, and he's a billionaire, and we went out and we walked down the street in Palo Alto and we had a contest who could get the most people for an interview. And the target was 50. And we did mock-up slides, and we sat down in cafes, and I took my iPhone and I had my laptop, my notebook, and I would actually do the presentation on the mock-ups, because what I didn't want to do is build something people didn't want.
That's exactly
And
right.
I got a lot of feedback on it. And then what I did is I took that feedback and sent it back to my engineers so they could hear exactly what the customer is saying, because they kept telling me, no, do it this way, do it this way. Well, technically it's interesting, but it's not exciting for the customers.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's what I recommend to everybody, is to try to make something before you sell it. And that's way easier today than it has been ever in history. There's so many prototyping tools. There's so many scenarios you can put someone in. And if you can't create a prototype, or you're really budget constrained, you have, don't have the skills yourself, it's easy to use a competitor software or something that's really similar, and show that to your customer and ask them what issues that they're having, and then solve those problems. So I think testing is the most important thing I've found in my career, and that's why I've become so focused on it, and feel like it's the most valuable thing.
Yeah, you're right. And going down through by using the model of customer discovery for validation to validate your hypothesis to make sure that it's right is going to save you a ton of money, right? The
saves you so much time and money over.
The other thing is, what I've seen is a lot of times they'll hire salespeople way too early in the process instead of doing this themselves. They'll go out and get salespeople. Of course, salespeople will tell you anything you want to hear.
That's right. They'll sell features that don't exist, and then you piss off engineering and the project managers, and their roadmap is destroyed. And sometimes those features are just for that one customer, and that customer need isn't shared across your demographic, and so you kind of wasted some engineering time and served as a custom development shop for someone. And so I see this all the time. And so that's why listening well is so important, because you need to find that common denominator. You need to find the thing that serves multiple customers and is a pain point that's felt frequently and severely.
Yeah, well, that the drive for revenue is part of the reason they're doing it, is because they want the revenue coming in.
Yeah,
justify it.
Which is helpful too.
Yeah, it's helpful as long as you're doing the right thing and you're not so far. Interesting stories. I was at Stanford University, and Stuart Butterfield from Slack was there, and we were talking, and I said, he said, I had no choice of coming up with Slack. It was like our development tool that we had inside, our collaboration tool. We're a gaming company. And he said, I didn't have anything else. So I had laid off a lot of people, and we focused on this because that's what I had. And now he ended up creating Slack out of that. And sometimes that I've seen it a few times, actually. Sometimes you just have to do it, right? You have no choice.
Yeah, you got to pivot. Exactly. And you got to use what you have. And that resourcefulness is the preparation that leads to opportunity, or leads to luck in those kinds of situations.
Well, you create your own luck, right? You put yourself in the right situation where those things happen. There is some serendipity with luck.
Absolutely.
So when you've gone down through it, so, as you're going down through, Mantra, Mobile X Labs, what did you find? Well, if you could say the number one characteristic, though, of the companies that succeeded, what would that be? Besides traction.
Agility. Yeah. Like, I think there was a time, in that era of my career where we had pivoted 4 or 5 times and had completely different business models, had completely different team structures. And we needed to let, 10, 15 people go overnight once. We needed to, do some crazy fundraising. And all of that was to kind of keep going. So I think it's like a lot of it is just agility and grit, and sticking to it. Because ultimately we built one of the fastest growing companies in North America, software companies in North America last year. So I think, sticking to it is probably the most important. Is not getting deterred, not seeing failure as a negative, but an opportunity for us to learn from.
And then, so as you're going down through that, how important is getting the stock options? When you go into those companies, how do you negotiate for the stock options? Because I hear that a lot. Is people say, of course, I've done it a number of times myself, but how do you do
Yeah.
that? How do you negotiate with those options?
Which stage company we're talking about? Just like pre-seed
Yeah,
stuff?
early stage. Yeah, early stage. So you come in an early stage company. When you're right on the ground floor of the thing, then the company ends up taking off. But what do
Mhm.
you do in terms of how did you approach it? Did you approach it based on the value that you could bring to the company, or did you?
Yeah.
Run?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say this is going to work for everybody. For me, I was kind of overqualified for the salary that I was getting. So most people take a cut in salary in early stage companies because budgets are thin. So what I would do is I would take the differential in the salary reduction, double or triple that in terms of cash, convert that to equity, and then use that as my starting point to build on top of. So it's like, okay, give me 0.5% to start. If I'm just an advisor, early stage employee, then give me the opportunity to do another 1%, 2%, because ultimately you need to get larger stakes like single percentages, at least multiple percentage points, at least, because they'll get diluted over time as you raise further capital. So I like to get cap tables just under 5% in the pre-seed stage for the work that I do, and have been lucky enough to get on a few of those cap tables over the years.
That's great. Yeah, it surely helps, especially when you get liquid, right? So,
Yeah.
if you're going down through, you're down in Mexico City now. How do you feel down there? You're an expat in Mexico City. How does it feel, and how do you look at the startup world? How different is it? I don't mean in Mexico, but looking at the U.S., how different is the startup world looking at it from Mexico City, or is it the same?
I think it's the same. I've got a lot of hope for the Latin American startup ecosystem in general. I'm very bullish on it. Made a couple of investments here, and I think there's a really interesting opportunity for VCs to look down in this direction. I'm excited for what's coming for Mexico City, and Mexico City for all of Latin America, but Mexico City specifically has the opportunity to be the kind of capital of all of that. It seems like, from what I'm hearing, it's like Bogota, Colombia, and Mexico City as the two potential tech capitals outside Spanish-speaking Latin America. Obviously, Brazil is massive and has their own startup capital there.
How was the language? Being in Mexico, did you know Spanish before you went down there or not?
No, estoy aprendiendo right now, but I'm hopeful that I'll be fluent or conversational at least in the next year or so. I just had a son here, and he's Mexican, so his first language will be Spanish, and so we'll be speaking Spanish in the house a lot more.
Wow, that's great. All right, listen, we're coming up to the top of the show. So, closing thoughts, and how do people get a hold of you, Nick?
I got a website, nickmcevily.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. So find me there. I'm just a guy these days. I like to say I'm a venture studio of one, and excited to collaborate on some projects together in the future.
It sounds great. Well, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. We really appreciate it.
Gary.
For all of my audience out there, thank you one more time for joining GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech. My name is Gary Fowler, and I'm your host. Stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy, and I'll be back to you again soon with another exciting edition. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.